At 73, I never expected to find out that my entire life had been built on a lie. My name is Margaret Chen, and this is the story of how a dusty box in my late aunt's attic revealed secrets that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. If you love your parents, don't forget to share something special about them in the comments and subscribe for more amazing videos. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October. My Aunt Linda had passed away peacefully in her sleep, and I was the only family member listed in her will. We hadn't spoken in over 15 years, not since that awkward Christmas dinner where she'd made some cryptic comments about things I didn't understand yet. I'd always thought she was a bit eccentric, living alone in that old Victorian house with her cats and her garden. Standing in her dusty hallway 3 days later, I felt overwhelmed. The house was filled with decades of accumulated memories, photographs covering every surface, and the lingering scent of lavender and old books. I'd hired a cleaning service to help sort through everything, but there were personal items that only family should handle. The attic ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed up with a flashlight. I hadn't been in an attic since I was a child, and this one felt impossibly cramped and warm despite the October chill outside. Boxes lined the walls, each one labeled in Linda's careful handwriting. Christmas decorations 1987, Mom's China, Robert's things. Robert. That was my grandfather's name, though he died when I was very young. I barely remembered him. Just flashes of a tall man who smelled like pipe tobacco and always had peppermints in his pocket. I pulled the box labeled Robert's Things toward me, my back already aching from crouching under the low ceiling. Inside, I found the usual items you'd expect: an old watch, some photographs, a few books with worn covers. But underneath everything else, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. The box was locked, but the key was tied to the handle with a piece of string. My hands trembled slightly as I turned it. I told myself it was just the cold, but something about the weight of the box, the deliberate way it had been hidden, made my heart race. Inside were letters, dozens of them tied with ribbon and organized by date. The oldest ones were from 1952, written in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. But they weren't addressed to my grandmother, as I'd expected. They were addressed to someone named Elena Vasquez. "My dearest Elena," the first letter began, "I know the distance between us feels impossible, but I think of you every day. The baby grows stronger, and she has your eyes." Baby? I read the letter again, my mind struggling to process the words. My grandfather had another family. The letter was dated just 2 months before my mother was born. I opened another letter, this one from 1954. "Elena, I've received your photographs of little Carmen. She's beautiful, just like her mother. I wish I could be there to watch her grow up, but you know it's impossible. I've set aside money for her education, as promised. Carmen." There was a Carmen out there, my mother's half-sister, and I'd never known she existed. My hands were shaking now as I reached for more letters. There were responses, too, written in a graceful script I didn't recognize. Elena's letters talked about their daughter, about struggling to make ends meet, about hoping that someday the family could be whole. Robert, one letter from 1959 read, "Carmen asks about her father every day. She's so smart, getting top marks in all her classes. She wants to be a teacher like you said you were. I don't know how much longer I can keep making excuses." I sat back on my heels, the letter still in my hands. My grandfather had been a teacher, but he'd also been living a double life. While he was raising my mother in Chicago, he had another daughter in what looked like Mexico, based on the postmarks. The next letter I opened stopped my breath entirely. It was dated 1961, and it was from a lawyer. "Dear Mr. Chen," it read, "I regret to inform you of the death of Elena Vasquez in a car accident on March 15th. As per your previous instructions, I have arranged for your daughter Carmen to be placed with the Morales family in Guadalajara. The monthly payments you specified will continue until she reaches 18. Carmen had been orphaned at age 7, and my grandfather had arranged for her care. But why hadn't he brought her to Chicago? Why hadn't my grandmother known? I found my answer in the next set of letters. These were between my grandfather and my grandmother, letters I was never supposed to see. Robert, my grandmother had written in 1962, I found the bank statements. I know about the money you've been sending to Mexico. How could you keep this from me for 10 years? His response was careful, apologetic. We have our own family. This other life you've been living, it has to stop. The correspondence showed months of arguments, negotiations, compromises. Finally, in 1963, there was an agreement. The payments to Carmen would continue, but all contact would cease. My grandfather would never see his Mexican daughter again. But the letters didn't end there. Hidden at the bottom of the box were more recent ones, dated from the 1980s and 1990s. These were addressed to my Aunt Linda. "Dear Linda," one began, "you probably don't remember me, but I'm Carmen Morales, formerly Carmen Vasquez. I believe your father was my father too. Carmen had found us. She'd spent years tracking down her father's family, and she'd made contact with Linda, who had apparently been keeping the secret all these years." The final letter in the box was dated just 2 years ago. "Linda, I understand if you can't tell the rest of the family about me, but I wanted you to know that I became a teacher, just like our father wanted. I have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. We're doing well, but I've always wondered about my American family." Attached to the letter was a photograph, a woman who looked remarkably like my mother, surrounded by a large, smiling family. On the back, someone had written, "The Morales family, Christmas 2022. I stared at the photograph for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. This woman, Carmen, was my aunt. These smiling children and grandchildren were my cousins. I had an entire family I'd never known existed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me back to the present. It was a text from my daughter asking how the cleanup was going. I looked around the attic at the scattered letters and the opened box and realized that cleaning up was the least of my concerns now. I had a choice to make. I could put everything back in the box, pretend I'd never found it, and let the secret die with Linda. Or I could do what felt both terrifying and right. I could find Carmen Morales and introduce myself to the sister my mother never knew she had. But first, I needed to understand why Linda had kept this secret for so long, and what other surprises might be waiting in this house full of hidden history. I carefully placed the letters back in the wooden box and climbed down from the attic, my mind racing with questions. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves were hiding secrets. I walked through the rooms with new eyes, looking for clues I might have missed. Linda's bedroom was sparse but organized. Her dresser held the usual items: jewelry, reading glasses, a small stack of books. But as I opened the drawers more carefully, I found something odd. Behind her sweaters was another envelope, this one addressed to me personally. "Margaret," it read in Linda's familiar handwriting, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the letters in the attic. I always hoped I'd have the courage to tell you about Carmen while I was alive, but some conversations are harder than others." My hands trembled as I continued reading. "Your grandfather made me promise never to tell your mother about Carmen. He said it would destroy your grandmother, who was already fragile after her miscarriages. But Carmen deserved to know about her family, so I became the bridge between 2 worlds." The letter went on to explain that Linda and Carmen had been corresponding for over 20 years. They'd exchanged photos, stories, updates about their families. Linda had watched Carmen's children grow up through pictures and letters, had celebrated their graduations and weddings from afar. "Carmen is a wonderful woman," Linda wrote. "She's kind, intelligent, and she's raised her family with so much love despite never knowing her father. She teaches 2nd grade at a school in Guadalajara, just like Robert always dreamed she would. She's never been bitter about the secrets or the separation. She just wanted to know she had family somewhere who cared about her." But then came the part that made my blood run cold. "Margaret, there's something else you need to know. Last month, Carmen wrote to tell me she's been diagnosed with kidney disease. She needs a transplant, and none of her children or grandchildren are compatible matches. I was going to get tested myself, but at my age, I wouldn't have been a candidate anyway." I sat down hard on Linda's bed, the letter shaking in my hands. Carmen was sick, seriously sick, and she needed family help. Family she didn't even know existed beyond Linda's letters. "I've included Carmen's current address and phone number in this envelope," Linda continued. "I know this is a lot to ask, but she's your blood, Margaret. Your mother's blood. And she's running out of time." I found the slip of paper with Carmen's information, my heart pounding. Carmen Morales, 1247 Calle de las Flores, Guadalajara, Mexico. There was a phone number written in Linda's careful script. But there was more. As I searched through Linda's bedroom more thoroughly, I found a small photo album hidden behind her mirror. Inside were dozens of pictures I'd never seen before. Carmen as a young woman graduating from teaching college. Carmen on her wedding day, radiant in a simple white dress. Carmen with her newborn children, then as they grew older. But what struck me most was how much Carmen looked like my mother. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when she smiled. Looking at these photos was like seeing my mother's life played out in parallel in another country. At the back of the album, I found something that made me gasp. It was a photo of Linda herself, standing next to Carmen in what looked like a Mexican marketplace. They were both smiling, their arms around each other like old friends. Linda had gone to Mexico. She'd met Carmen in person. I flipped the photo over and found a date, just 3 years ago. There was also a note in Linda's handwriting. "Finally met my sister. She's everything I hoped she would be." My mind reeled. Linda had traveled to Mexico secretly to meet Carmen, and she'd never told anyone in the family. How many other secrets had she been keeping? I spent the rest of that day searching through every room, every drawer, every hiding place I could think of. What I found painted a picture of a woman who had been living a double life for decades. In her kitchen, behind a loose board in the pantry, I found bank statements showing regular money transfers to Mexico. Linda had been sending Carmen financial help for years. In her garage, hidden in an old toolbox, were dozens more letters and even what looked like legal documents. The legal papers were the most shocking discovery yet. Linda had been working with lawyers both in the United States and Mexico to try to bring Carmen's family to America legally. There were visa applications, sponsorship papers, immigration forms dating back over 15 years. But every attempt had been denied or had fallen through for various reasons. Carmen's husband had a minor criminal record from his youth that complicated things. The immigration laws had changed. The paperwork was always missing something crucial. Linda had spent thousands of dollars and years of effort trying to reunite the family, and she'd done it all in secret. As evening fell, I sat in Linda's living room surrounded by the evidence of her hidden life. Photos of Carmen's family covered the coffee table, letters speaking of birthdays and holidays, achievements and struggles, hopes and fears. This wasn't just correspondence between distant relatives. This was the record of a deep, loving relationship between sisters who had never been allowed to meet openly. That's when I found the final piece of the puzzle. It was tucked inside one of Linda's recipe books, a letter from Carmen dated just 6 months ago. "Dear Linda," it began, "I know you've been trying for so long to help us come to America, but I think it's time to accept that it's not going to happen through official channels. My health is getting worse, and the doctors say I don't have much time left to find a donor." The letter went on to describe Carmen's deteriorating condition and her family's desperation. But then came the paragraph that changed everything. "I've been thinking about what you said in your last letter, about how family should know about family. I know you've kept my existence secret to protect people's feelings, but maybe it's time for the truth. My daughter Sophia is studying at the University of Texas now. She got a scholarship, can you believe it? She's so smart, just like her grandfather was. She could be the bridge between our families that we've always needed. Sophia. Carmen had a daughter studying in Texas, just a few states away from where I lived in Colorado. A granddaughter I didn't know existed was already in the United States. I grabbed Linda's laptop from her desk and, after guessing her password on the third try, it was Carmen's birthday, I found her email account. The recent messages told the rest of the story. Sophia Morales had been emailing Linda regularly. She knew about the American family, knew about the secrets and the separation. She'd been begging Linda to make contact, especially after her mother's diagnosis became serious. The most recent email, sent just 2 weeks before Linda's death, was heartbreaking. Tia Linda, it read, Mom is getting sicker every day. The doctors say she has maybe 6 months if we can't find a donor soon. I know you promised Abuelo you'd keep the secret, but Mom needs her family now. Please, isn't there someone who might be willing to get tested? I can't lose her when I just found out I have family who might be able to help. Sophia had included her phone number and her address in Austin, Texas. She was a 22-year-old graduate student in education, following in her mother's and great-grandfather's footsteps. I stared at the computer screen for a long time, Sophia's words echoing in my mind. Carmen was dying, and she needed family help. Her daughter was desperately trying to save her mother's life, reaching out to relatives she'd never met. But there was something else bothering me, something that didn't quite add up. If Linda had been corresponding with Carmen for 20 years, and if she'd even visited Mexico to meet her, why had she never made the introduction to the rest of the family? What was she really afraid of? I found my answer in Linda's journal, hidden in her nightstand drawer. The entries from the past year painted a picture of a woman torn between competing loyalties. March 15th. Got Carmen's diagnosis today. My heart is breaking for her and for Sophia, but how can I tell Margaret about this now? How do I explain 20 years of lies? What if they hate me for keeping this secret? What if they refuse to help? April 3rd. Dorothy is gone now, has been for 5 years. The promise I made to Robert doesn't have to extend beyond the grave, does it? But Margaret loved her father so much. What will she think when she learns he had another family? What will it do to her memories of him? May 20th. Sophia called again today, crying. Carmen collapsed at school and had to be hospitalized. The doctors are saying the kidney failure is accelerating. I have to do something, but I'm such a coward. At 81, am I too old to finally tell the truth? The final entry was dated just 1 week before Linda's death. June 8th. I've decided I'm going to tell Margaret everything when she comes for my birthday next month. I've written her a letter explaining everything, and I've organized all the documents so she can understand the whole story. Carmen and Sophia deserve to know their American family, and Margaret deserves to know she has a sister and niece. I just pray I have the courage to go through with it when the time comes. But Linda had died before her birthday, before she could make that conversation happen. She'd left everything for me to discover on my own, probably hoping I'd be more objective about the situation than she'd been able to be. I looked at the clock on Linda's wall. It was nearly midnight, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. Carmen was dying, and somewhere in Texas, her daughter Sophia was probably lying awake wondering if her Aunt Linda would ever find the courage to reach out to the American family. I picked up my phone and stared at Sophia's number. One call could change everything. One conversation could save a life or complicate dozens of others. My mother, who was 75 and had never known she had a half-sister, would have to learn that her father had kept a massive secret his entire life. My own children would discover they had Mexican cousins they'd never known existed. But as I sat there, in Linda's quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of her decades-long secret, I realized that some truths are bigger than the discomfort they cause. Carmen and Sophia weren't strangers. They were family. And family, even family you've never met, doesn't let each other face life's biggest challenges alone. I dialed Sophia's number before I could change my mind. After 3 rings, a young woman's voice answered, speaking in accented English. "Hello?" "Sophia," I said, my voice shaking. "This is Margaret Chen. I'm Linda's niece, and I think we need to talk." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. Then I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Margaret? Tia Linda's Margaret? Oh my God, you found the letters, didn't you?" Her voice was thick with emotion, and I could hear her trying not to cry. The combination of hope and desperation in her tone broke my heart. "Yes, I found everything. The letters, the photos, Linda's journal. Sophia, I had no idea you existed until today, but I know about your mother's condition, and I want to help." "She's sleeping right now," Sophia said, her words tumbling out quickly. "She had dialysis today, and she's so tired afterward. But Margaret, I can't believe you're actually calling me. Tia Linda said she would try to contact the family, but after she stopped answering my emails 2 weeks ago, I thought, Sophia, I need to tell you something. Linda passed away last Tuesday. I'm so sorry. I know how close you two were." The silence that followed was filled with Sophia's quiet sobs. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "She's gone? But she was supposed to help me figure out how to contact you. She promised she would find a way to bring our families together before Mom—" Sophia couldn't finish the sentence. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "Linda may be gone, but you're not alone in this anymore. I'm here and I want to help, but I need you to tell me everything about your mother's condition, about what the doctors have said, about what kind of help you need." For the next hour, Sophia told me her story, how she'd grown up knowing she had an American grandfather, but never understanding why the families were separated, how her mother had always spoken lovingly of a father she barely remembered, a man who had wanted to be a teacher and who had loved books and learning. Mom became a teacher because of him, Sophia explained. Even though she only knew him for 7 years, she remembered how he would read to her and help her with her letters. She said he told her that education was the one thing no one could ever take away from her. Carmen had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died in a construction accident 10 years ago. Sophia was the youngest and the only one who had been able to get a scholarship to study in the United States. "I came here planning to study and then go back to help my family," Sophia said. "But when Mom got sick, everything changed. The doctors in Guadalajara said she needed to get on a transplant list, but the waiting time there is years. Here in the U.S., if she could somehow get treated here, she might have a chance." But there was a problem Sophia hadn't mentioned in her emails to Linda. Carmen wasn't just sick. She was undocumented. She'd crossed the border illegally 20 years ago to try to find her father's family, but had been caught and deported. Any attempt to seek medical treatment in the U.S. now could result in her being deported again, even if she was dying. "That's why Tia Linda was trying so hard to find a legal way to bring us here," Sophia explained. She knew Mom couldn't just show up at an American hospital, but the visa applications kept getting rejected and time was running out. As Sophia talked, I found myself looking through more of Linda's documents. There were printouts of medical information, research about kidney transplants, lists of hospitals and doctors. Linda had been trying to find a way to help Carmen get treatment in the U.S., but every avenue seemed blocked by legal complications. "Sophia," I said slowly, "what if Carmen didn't have to come to the U.S.? What if someone from the family came to Mexico and got tested there? You would do that." Sophia's voice was filled with disbelief. "You would actually come here?" "If I'm a match, yes. But Sophia, there's something else we need to talk about. I haven't told my mother about any of this yet. She doesn't know she has a half-sister. This is going to be a shock for my entire family." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I know." Tia Linda explained how Abuelo made everyone promise to keep the secret. She said your grandmother never knew about Mom, and that telling the truth might hurt people who had done nothing wrong. "My grandmother died 5 years ago," I said gently. "The promise was made to protect her, but she's gone now. The only people left to protect are the living, and that includes your mother." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, making plans and sharing stories. Sophia told me about her mother's love for books, her dedication to her students, her determination to give her children better lives than she'd had. I told Sophia about Linda, about the secret correspondence, about how much Linda had clearly loved Carmen despite never being able to acknowledge her publicly. Before we hung up, Sophia gave me her mother's phone number. "She speaks English," Sophia said. "Abuelo taught her when she was little, and she's kept it up because of her correspondence with Tia Linda. Margaret, would you call her tomorrow? I think she needs to hear from family right now." After ending the call, I sat in Linda's living room surrounded by the evidence of her secret life. But now it wasn't just documents and photos. It was real people with real needs. Carmen, who was dying and didn't know that help might be coming. Sophia, who was trying to save her mother while navigating a foreign country and a complicated family situation. But there was still something nagging at me, something that didn't quite fit. I went back to Linda's computer and started reading through her emails more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Linda had received an email from someone named David Harrison, claiming to be a private investigator. He said he'd been hired by interested parties to locate Carmen Morales and her family. He wanted to know if Linda had any information about Carmen's whereabouts or her connection to the Chen family. Linda had responded cautiously, asking who was looking for Carmen and why. David's reply was vague. He said his clients preferred to remain anonymous for now, but that they had legitimate business with Carmen regarding her father's estate. Estate? My grandfather had died nearly 30 years ago. What estate could there possibly be? I kept reading and found that Linda had become suspicious too. She'd hired her own private investigator to look into David Harrison and his mysterious clients. What her investigator found was disturbing. David Harrison was real, but he was working for a law firm that specialized in what they called heritage recovery, finding heirs to unclaimed assets and taking a large percentage of whatever they recovered. But more troubling, the law firm had connections to people who specialized in immigration enforcement. Linda's investigator had warned her that this could be a setup. Find Carmen under the pretense of an inheritance, then report her undocumented status to authorities. Carmen could be deported before she ever saw a penny of any supposed inheritance. But what inheritance? I went back to the box of letters and read through them more carefully. In one of my grandfather's early letters to Elena, he mentioned setting aside money for Carmen's education. But that money had been sent through regular payments over the years. There shouldn't be anything left, unless there was something else. Something Linda hadn't told me about. I spent the rest of the night searching through Linda's house more systematically. In her basement, behind an old furnace, I found a safe I hadn't noticed before. The combination was written on a piece of paper taped to the bottom of one of Linda's desk drawers. She'd hidden it, but not very well. Inside the safe were documents that changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather's story. The first document was a will, not my grandfather's official will that had been probated after his death, but an earlier version dated 1961. In this will, he left a substantial sum of money to Carmen Vasquez, my daughter, currently residing in Mexico. But this will had never been filed. Instead, there was a note in my grandfather's handwriting explaining why. "I cannot include Carmen in my official will without destroying my marriage and devastating Dorothy. But she deserves her inheritance. I have arranged for the money to be held in trust, to be given to her when she reaches the age of 40 or in the event of a medical emergency." The trust documents were there, too, along with bank statements showing that the money had been growing with interest for over 60 years. Carmen was entitled to nearly $200,000, money that could pay for her medical treatment, money that could change her family's life. But someone else knew about the trust. The law firm that had contacted Linda wasn't trying to help Carmen claim her inheritance. They were trying to steal it. If they could locate Carmen and get her to sign over power of attorney under false pretenses, they could claim the money themselves. And there was worse news. According to the trust documents, if Carmen died without claiming the inheritance, the money would go to other heirs of Robert Chen, which meant it would come to my family. Someone had apparently decided that letting Carmen die was more profitable than helping her claim what was rightfully hers. I felt sick. While Sophia and Carmen were desperately trying to find a way to pay for medical treatment, people were actively working to prevent Carmen from accessing money that could save her life. But there was one more document in the safe that gave me hope. Linda had been working with a different lawyer, one who specialized in cross-border estate issues. She'd been trying to set up a way for Carmen to claim her inheritance safely without exposing her to immigration risks. The lawyer, Maria Santos, had offices in both San Antonio and Mexico City. According to her correspondence with Linda, there was a way to transfer Carmen's inheritance to her in Mexico, allowing her to get medical treatment there without having to enter the U.S. illegally. I looked at the clock. It was nearly dawn, but I couldn't wait any longer. I called Maria Santos's emergency number, leaving a message explaining who I was and what I'd discovered. She called me back within an hour. "Margaret," she said, "Linda told me about you. I've been waiting for someone from the family to contact me. We don't have much time. Those other lawyers are getting closer to finding Carmen, and once they do, they'll try to trick her into signing away her rights." What do we need to do? First, we need to contact Carmen immediately and warn her not to sign anything from anyone claiming to represent her father's estate. Second, we need to get her inheritance transferred to Mexico as quickly as possible. And third, we need to get her into a medical facility that can handle her case. Can the inheritance really pay for her treatment? More than pay for it. With that kind of money, she could get treatment at the best private hospitals in Mexico, or even travel to other countries if necessary. She could have the surgery she needs and still have enough left over to secure her family's future. For the first time since I'd found the letters, I felt hope. Carmen didn't have to die. Sophia didn't have to lose her mother, and our families could finally be reunited, not through tragedy but through the generosity my grandfather had planned all those years ago. But first, I had to call Carmen and tell her that the sister she'd never known she had was about to save her life with money their father had set aside before either of them was born. I dialed Carmen's number, my hands shaking with nervousness and excitement. After several rings, a weak voice answered in Spanish. "Bueno?" "Carmen," I said in my limited Spanish, then switched to English. "This is Margaret Chen. I'm Linda's niece, and I think I'm your half-sister." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had been dropped. Then I heard Carmen's voice, stronger now, filled with wonder and disbelief. "Margaret? My sister Margaret? You found me?" "I found you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "And Carmen, you're going to be okay. Our father left you money, enough money to get the medical care you need. You're going to be okay." Carmen's sobs came through the phone clearly, and I found myself crying too. Two women who had never met, separated by secrets and distance for 70 years, were finally talking to each other. And for the first time in months, Carmen had reason to hope she might live to see her grandchildren grow up. But even as we talked, I knew our troubles weren't over. The people trying to steal Carmen's inheritance were still out there, and they wouldn't give up easily. We had to move quickly to protect her money and her safety. And I still had to figure out how to tell my mother that everything she thought she knew about her father was about to change forever. The conversation with Carmen lasted 3 hours. Through tears and broken sentences, we shared 70 years of separate lives in a single phone call. She told me about growing up in orphanages after Elena's death, about the monthly money that came from America, that the nuns said was from a benefactor who cared about her education. She'd never known it was from her father. "I used to imagine him," Carmen said, her English flavored with a soft Mexican accent that reminded me somehow of my grandfather's voice. I would picture this kind man in America who wanted children to have books and learn to read. I never dreamed he was my father. She spoke about her years as a teacher, about the children she'd helped learn to read, about the small school in Guadalajara where she'd worked for 35 years before her illness forced her to retire. I always told my students that education was the one gift no one could take away from them. I didn't know I was quoting my own father. But as we talked, I began to notice troubling details in Carmen's story. 2 weeks ago, she'd received a visit from someone claiming to be a distant relative, a young man named Miguel who said he was researching family genealogy. He'd asked detailed questions about her background, her father's name, even her medical condition. "He seemed so nice," Carmen said. "He brought flowers and said he was so happy to find family, but Sophia didn't like him. She said something felt wrong about his questions." Miguel had left his contact information and promised to return with more family documents. But he'd also asked Carmen to keep their meeting secret for now, saying he wanted to surprise other family members with the family tree he was building. My stomach dropped. This had to be connected to the lawyers who were trying to steal Carmen's inheritance. They'd found her and were already working to gain her trust. "Carmen, this is very important," I said urgently. "Don't sign anything that man might bring you, and don't give him any personal information. He's not really family. He's working for people who want to steal money that belongs to you." I explained about the inheritance, about the lawyers, about the danger she was in. Carmen listened quietly, and when I finished, she was silent for a long time. $200,000? She finally whispered. "My father left me $200,000. Yes, and it's grown with interest over the years. But Carmen, these people who are trying to find you, they want to trick you into signing papers that would give them the money. You have to be very careful." "But how do I know you're telling the truth?" Carmen asked, and I realized how this must sound to her. A stranger calling in the middle of the night, claiming to be family, talking about large sums of money. It probably sounded exactly like the kind of scam the real fraudsters would run. "I'll prove it," I said. "Sophia has Linda's email address, right? I'm going to send you photos of all the letters your father wrote to your mother, photos of the trust documents, everything I found. And I'm going to give you the contact information for Maria Santos, the lawyer Linda was working with. She can verify everything independently." Over the next few hours, I scanned and emailed dozens of documents to Sophia, who translated the important parts for her mother. As Carmen saw the proof, her father's handwriting, photos of herself as a child that Linda had kept, legal documents bearing her name, she began to believe that her American family had finally found her. But we had a bigger problem than just convincing Carmen we were legitimate. As I continued reading through Linda's papers, I found evidence that the fraudulent lawyers were accelerating their timeline. They'd somehow learned about Carmen's deteriorating health and were planning to make their move within the next few days. Maria Santos called me back around noon with urgent news. "Margaret, I've been monitoring the other law firm's activities, and they've filed preliminary paperwork to claim Carmen's inheritance on behalf of what they call unlocated heirs. They're arguing that since Carmen can't be found, the money should be distributed to other family members, specifically to your family. But we're in contact with Carmen now. Doesn't that stop their claim?" "Not automatically. They're going to argue that any communication with Carmen is fraudulent, that someone is impersonating her to steal the money. It's a common tactic in inheritance fraud cases." The legal maneuvering was getting complicated, but Maria had a plan. If Carmen could get to the American consulate in Guadalajara and verify her identity officially, we could establish legal proof that she was alive and able to claim her inheritance. But the consulate appointment would take weeks to arrange, and Carmen might not have weeks. "There's another option," Maria said carefully. "If Carmen could get to the border, There are legal provisions for emergency medical treatment that might allow her to enter the U.S. temporarily. With proper documentation of her inheritance claim, she could potentially get treatment here while we sort out the legal issues. But crossing the border was exactly what Carmen couldn't do safely. Her previous deportation was on record, and attempting to enter the U.S. again could result in permanent banishment. That's when Sophia called with news that changed everything. "Margaret, you need to get down here right away. Miguel came back today, and this time he wasn't alone." According to Sophia, Miguel had returned with an older woman who claimed to be a lawyer representing Carmen's inheritance. They'd brought official-looking documents and had insisted on meeting with Carmen privately, saying they needed to discuss family business that was too sensitive for Sophia to hear. "I told them Mom was too sick to meet with anyone today, but they wouldn't leave," Sophia said, her voice tight with fear. "They're staying at a hotel nearby, and they said they'll keep coming back until they can meet with her. Margaret, I think they know we've been in contact with you." The woman asked specifically if Mom had heard from any American relatives recently. This was moving too fast. The fraudsters were clearly desperate to get Carmen's signature before we could establish her legal claim to the inheritance. But there was something else bothering me. How had they found Carmen so quickly? Linda had spent 20 years corresponding with her without anyone else knowing. But within months of Linda's death, multiple parties had located Carmen. I called Maria Santos back and asked her to investigate further. What she found was chilling. "Margaret, I think someone in Linda's lawyer's office leaked information about Carmen's location. The attorney Linda was working with to set up Carmen's inheritance claim. He's been talking to the other law firm. I think he's been feeding them information about our progress." We'd been betrayed by someone we trusted. But worse, if Linda's lawyer was corrupt, then all of our legal strategies might be compromised. The fraudsters could be preparing to counter every move we made. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We need to get Carmen out of Mexico immediately. If she stays there, they'll eventually wear her down or trick her into signing something. But if we can get her to the U.S., we can protect her while we sort out the inheritance." "But you said crossing the border was too dangerous for her?" "There's one more option we haven't discussed," Maria said. "You're a U.S. citizen, and you're Carmen's sister. You can petition for emergency family reunification on medical grounds. It's not guaranteed to work, but if we can demonstrate that Carmen will die without treatment only available in the U.S., and that she has close family here willing to support her, we might be able to get her temporary legal status. It would require me to officially sponsor Carmen's entry into the United States, taking legal and financial responsibility for her care. But it also meant acknowledging publicly that she was my family, which would require telling my mother and the rest of our relatives about the secret my grandfather had kept for 70 years. I looked around Linda's house at the evidence of her decades-long effort to protect Carmen while keeping the family secret. Linda had tried to have it both ways, maintaining the secret while still helping Carmen from a distance. But her approach had ultimately failed. The secret had left Carmen vulnerable to fraudsters and isolated from family support when she needed it most. It was time to choose between protecting the family's comfortable ignorance and saving Carmen's life. I called my mother. "Hi, Mom, it's Margaret. I'm still at Linda's house, cleaning things out. Mom, I need to tell you something important, and I need you to sit down." "What is it, honey? You sound upset." "Mom, I found something in Linda's attic. Letters from Grandpa." I took a deep breath. "Mom, did you know that Grandpa had another daughter?" The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long I wondered if my mother had hung up. "Margaret, what are you talking about?" So I told her everything. About Elena and Carmen, about the secret correspondence, about the inheritance and the fraudsters and Carmen's illness. My mother didn't say a word until I finished the entire story. "She's dying?" was the first thing my mother asked. "Yes, Mom. She needs a kidney transplant and she needs family help to get treatment." "Then we have to help her," my mother said without hesitation. "I don't care what secrets Dad kept or why. If I have a sister who's dying, we have to help her." My mother's immediate acceptance surprised me. I'd expected anger, hurt, betrayal. Instead, she sounded determined. "Margaret, I want to talk to Carmen. Can you arrange that?" Within an hour, I had Carmen, Sophia, my mother, and myself on a conference call. Hearing my mother and Carmen speak to each other for the first time was overwhelming. They both cried. They both apologized for secrets that weren't their fault, and they both expressed amazement at finally finding each other. "Carmen," my mother said, "I'm going to help you get to America. Whatever it takes, whatever paperwork we need to file, whatever money we need to spend. You're my sister, and I should have known about you 60 years ago." But even as we were planning Carmen's rescue, Sophia called with terrifying news. Miguel and his partner had returned to Carmen's house with what looked like police officers, or at least people dressed as police officers. "They're saying Mom has to come with them for questioning about immigration violations," Sophia said, barely controlling her panic. "Margaret, I think they're going to kidnap her." Carmen was in immediate physical danger. The fraudsters had apparently decided that if they couldn't trick her into signing papers, they would take her by force and forge her signature later. "Sophia, get your mother out of the house right now," I said. "Go to a hospital, go to the American consulate, go anywhere public with security cameras. Don't let them take her anywhere private." "But Margaret, Mom can barely walk. She's so weak from the dialysis, and she doesn't have her medication with her." We were out of time for legal solutions. Carmen needed immediate help, and she needed it from family. I made a decision that would change all of our lives. "Sophia, I'm coming to Mexico tonight. Have your mother ready to travel. We're bringing her to America, with or without official permission." "Margaret, that's kidnapping," Maria Santos warned when I called to tell her the plan. "If you take Carmen across the border without proper documentation, you could be arrested." "Then what do you suggest? Let her die in Mexico while we file paperwork? Give me 24 hours. Let me make some calls. There might be a way to get emergency documentation, but I need time." "Maria, she doesn't have 24 hours. Those people are going to take her tonight." That's when my mother called back with news that changed everything again. "Margaret, I've been making some calls of my own. I found something Linda never told you about." It turned out that Linda hadn't been Carmen's only connection to the American family. My mother had started calling relatives, asking if anyone had ever heard the name Carmen Vasquez. My cousin David, Linda's nephew, remembered something strange. 20 years ago, Linda asked me to help her send money to Mexico, David told my mother. She said it was for a friend, but she was very secretive about it. She had me set up a bank account in my name and make regular transfers. I always wondered why she didn't just do it herself. David still had access to that bank account, and the account had been receiving deposits not just from Linda, but from several other family members who Linda had quietly recruited over the years to help Carmen. My uncle Robert, Linda's brother, had been sending money. My cousin Sarah had been contributing to what she thought was a scholarship fund for Mexican students. Linda had been running a secret family support network for Carmen, convincing relatives to help without telling them they were helping their own cousin. "Margaret," my mother said, "half the family has been unknowingly supporting Carmen for years. When I explained the situation to them, they all want to help bring her to America officially. We have enough family sponsors to make a very strong case for emergency immigration status. But we still had the immediate problem of getting Carmen away from the people who were trying to kidnap her. And that's when Sophia called with the most unexpected news of all. "Margaret, you're not going to believe this. Miguel just called me. He says he wants to help us." "What do you mean?" "He says he's not really working for the lawyers. He says he's an undercover investigator working for the Mexican government, investigating the American law firm for immigration fraud. He says they've been running this scam on other families, and they want to use Carmen's case to build a prosecution against them." If Miguel was telling the truth, then Carmen wasn't in danger from kidnappers. She was being protected by Mexican law enforcement. But if he was lying, then Sofia was being manipulated into walking her mother directly into the fraudster's trap. Sofia, don't trust him until we can verify his story. Can you get to the American consulate without him knowing? I think so, but Margaret, there's something else. Mom collapsed again this morning. She's in the hospital now, and the doctors say her kidneys are shutting down completely. Even if we can sort out all the legal problems, she might not survive long enough for treatment. Carmen was dying, potentially right now, while we were trying to navigate international law enforcement and inheritance fraud. Every hour we delayed could be the difference between saving her life and losing her forever. I made the only decision that made sense. I booked a flight to Mexico City, leaving that night. I'm coming to get her, I told Sofia. Legal or illegal, dangerous or safe, I'm bringing my sister home. The flight to Mexico City was the longest 5 hours of my life. I sat in the cramped airplane seat, clutching a folder full of documents that proved Carmen's inheritance claim, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, or finally doing something that should have been done decades ago. Maria Santos had managed to arrange emergency legal documentation that would at least give us a chance at the border, but she'd warned me that the situation was more complicated than we'd realized. The law firm trying to steal Carmen's inheritance wasn't just running a simple fraud. They were part of a larger network that specialized in targeting vulnerable immigrants and their families. They've done this before, Maria had explained during our rushed phone call before my flight. They identify undocumented immigrants who might have inheritance claims, then use the threat of deportation to force them to sign over their rights. If the victims resist, they sometimes arrange for immigration raids that conveniently happen right before the inheritance paperwork is finalized. But there was another layer to the conspiracy that Maria had only discovered that afternoon. The corrupt lawyer in Linda's firm, who had been feeding information to the fraudsters, wasn't just motivated by money. He was Linda's own grandson, Michael Chen, my cousin David's son. Michael has been struggling with gambling debts, Maria explained. The fraudsters approached him months ago and offered to pay off his debts in exchange for information about Linda's estate work. He's been feeding them details about all of Linda's clients, not just Carmen. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. Michael had access to all of Linda's private correspondence with Carmen, all of her legal research, even her travel plans when she'd visited Mexico. He'd been selling out his own grandmother's work to pay gambling debts. But Michael's betrayal had an unexpected consequence. It meant that the fraudsters knew exactly when I was coming to Mexico and what my plans were. They'd be waiting for me. I landed in Mexico City at midnight and immediately called Sofia from the airport. Her voice was strained with exhaustion and fear. "Margaret, thank God you're here. Mom's condition got worse after you left. She's been unconscious for the past 6 hours, and the doctors say her kidneys have completely stopped functioning. They're keeping her alive on dialysis, but she needs surgery within the next 48 hours or—" Sofia couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Carmen was dying and we were running out of time for everything. The legal battles, the inheritance claims, even the chance for us to meet face to face. "Where are you now?" I asked. "At the Hospital General. Miguel is here too, and Margaret. I think you need to hear what he has to say. Some of it changes everything." I took a taxi directly to the hospital, my mind racing with possibilities. If Miguel really was an undercover investigator, then maybe we had law enforcement protection. But if he was part of the fraud scheme, then I could be walking into a trap. The Hospital General was a massive, crowded facility that reminded me of every big city public hospital I'd ever seen. Overworked staff, long lines, families camped out in waiting areas with nowhere else to go. Sofia met me at the main entrance, and I was struck by how much she looked like my mother at the same age. The same determined expression, the same worry lines around her eyes. "She's in the ICU," Sophia said, leading me through a maze of corridors. The doctors have been wonderful, but they've done everything they can here. She needs specialized surgery that's not available at this hospital. Miguel was waiting outside the ICU, and seeing him in person was jarring. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 25, with an earnest face that made him look more like a graduate student than either a criminal or a law enforcement officer. "Mrs. Chen," he said, standing up as Sophia and I approached, "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need to explain what's really happening here." Miguel's story was more complex than either of the versions I'd been told. He was indeed working with Mexican law enforcement, but not as an official investigator. He was a law student who had been recruited by a prosecutor's office that was building a case against the American law firm for cross-border fraud. "The problem is that we need victims to come forward and testify," Miguel explained. "Most of the people these lawyers have targeted are too afraid of deportation to cooperate with law enforcement. When we learned about Carmen's case, we thought it might be different because she has American family willing to support her. But Miguel's investigation had uncovered something that changed the entire situation. The fraudulent law firm wasn't just trying to steal Carmen's inheritance. They were working with immigration enforcement to identify and deport undocumented immigrants who might have legitimate legal claims in the United States. They've been running this scheme for years," Miguel said. "Find undocumented immigrants with potential inheritance claims, try to steal the money, and if that doesn't work, report the immigrants to Border Patrol. Either way, the immigrants disappear and can't pursue their legal rights." Carmen wasn't just a victim of inheritance fraud. She was a target in a systematic campaign to deny undocumented immigrants access to legal recourse. And now that I was involved, the stakes had gotten much higher. "Mrs. Chen, they know you're here," Miguel warned. "Your cousin Michael told them about your flight, about your plans to take Carmen to the United States. They're going to try to stop you." "How?" "Immigration raid. They've convinced Border Patrol that Carmen is part of a family smuggling operation, that you're helping multiple undocumented immigrants enter the U.S. illegally using fake inheritance claims. They have a warrant to arrest both of you." I felt the blood drain from my face. Not only was Carmen in danger, but I could be arrested as an accomplice to immigration violations I hadn't even committed. The simple plan to help my sister had turned into an international, legal nightmare. "But there's something they don't know," Miguel continued. "We've been building our case against them for months, and we're ready to make arrests. If Carmen can stay alive long enough for us to move against the law firm, she'll be protected as a witness in a federal prosecution. That status would give her legal immunity and access to medical treatment in either Mexico or the United States." Sophia looked between Miguel and me, her face pale with exhaustion and stress. "How long do we have to wait?" 72 hours. The arrests are scheduled for this weekend." "Miguel, my mother doesn't have 72 hours. She might not have 72 minutes. That's when a doctor emerged from the ICU and approached our group. His expression was grave, and he spoke in rapid Spanish to Sophia before switching to English for my benefit. "I'm Dr. Ramirez. You are Carmen's family?" When I nodded, he continued. "Her condition is critical. The dialysis is not sufficient anymore. She needs immediate surgical intervention, but we do not have the facilities here for the type of surgery she requires." "What kind of surgery?" I asked. "Emergency kidney transplant. But even if we had a donor match, our transplant program is not equipped for her level of kidney failure. She needs a facility with more advanced technology." "Are there facilities like that in Mexico?" "Yes, but they are private hospitals that require payment in advance. The cost would be significant, perhaps $100,000 or more." I thought about the inheritance money sitting in trust accounts, money that belonged to Carmen but that she couldn't access because of legal complications and fraudulent lawyers. She had the money to pay for her treatment, but bureaucracy and criminals were preventing her from using it to save her own life. "Dr. Ramirez, if we could guarantee payment, could she be transferred to one of those private facilities?" Possibly. But she would need to be stable enough for transport, and we would need the receiving hospital to agree to accept her. It would take time to arrange. Time was the one thing we didn't have. But as I stood there in the hospital corridor, looking at Sophia's desperate face and thinking about Carmen lying unconscious just a few feet away, I realized that all of our careful legal planning had missed the most important point. Carmen was going to die while we argued about paperwork. I made a decision that would either save her life or destroy mine. Dr. Ramirez, I want to arrange for Carmen's immediate transfer to the best private hospital in Mexico City. I'll guarantee payment personally. Margaret, you can't afford that kind of money, Sophia protested. I can't afford to let my sister die, I replied. The inheritance money is hers legally, even if she can't access it right now. I'll pay for her treatment and we'll sort out the reimbursement later. But Dr. Ramirez was shaking his head. Mrs. Chen, I appreciate your commitment to your sister, but even with guaranteed payment, the transfer process would take several hours to arrange. And honestly, I'm not sure she would survive the transport in her current condition. Miguel had been listening to our conversation with growing urgency. There might be another option, he said quietly. The American Hospital in Mexico City. It's a private facility that serves American expatriates and tourists. They have a kidney transplant program, and they're equipped to handle emergency cases. But the same problems apply, Dr. Ramirez said. Cost, transport time, her condition. Not necessarily. I know someone who works there, another law student who's been helping with our investigation. If I explain the situation, she might be able to expedite the process. Miguel made a phone call in rapid Spanish, speaking urgently to someone on the other end. After several minutes, he hung up and turned back to us. Good news and bad news. The good news is that they can accept Carmen as an emergency transfer, and they have an operating room available tonight. The bad news is that they need a family member to sign financial guarantees, and they need assurance that Carmen's legal status won't cause problems for the hospital. I can sign the financial papers, I said immediately, and I can provide documentation that Carmen is a protected witness in a federal investigation, Miguel added. That should resolve any legal status concerns. Dr. Ramirez looked skeptical, but willing to try. I can arrange for emergency transport, but the family needs to understand that this is very high risk. Carmen is extremely weak, and any stress could cause her heart to fail. Sophia grabbed my hand. Margaret, what if moving her kills her? What if not moving her kills her? I replied. Sophia, your mother has survived 70 years of separation from her family, raised 3 children alone, and dedicated her life to educating other people's children. She's not going to give up now, not when we've finally found each other. As the medical team prepared Carmen for transport, I called my mother to explain what was happening. Her response surprised me. Margaret, I want to fly down there. Carmen shouldn't be going through this with only strangers around her. Mom, you don't have to do that. This could get legally complicated. She's my sister, Margaret. I missed 70 years of her life because of secrets and misunderstandings. I'm not missing this. My mother booked a flight that would arrive the next morning, and I realized that Carmen's medical crisis was bringing our families together in a way that decades of letters and secret correspondence never could. But as the ambulance prepared to transfer Carmen to the American hospital, Miguel received a phone call that changed everything again. Margaret, we have a problem. The immigration raid I warned you about, it's happening tonight. Border Patrol agents are on their way to the hospital right now. How is that possible? Carmen is unconscious in intensive care. They're not just coming for Carmen. They're coming for you, too. The law firm has convinced them that you're running an international smuggling operation, using fake medical emergencies to bring undocumented immigrants into the U.S. I looked around the hospital corridor at Sophia's terrified face, at the medical team preparing to move her dying mother, at Miguel who was trying to juggle law enforcement politics and a federal investigation. In the space of 24 hours, trying to help my sister had turned me into a fugitive. What do we do? We run, Miguel said simply. We get Carmen to the American hospital, we get her into surgery, and we hope that saving her life is more important than the bureaucratic games people are playing with her legal status. The next few hours were a blur of ambulance rides, emergency room procedures, and frantic phone calls to lawyers and government officials. Carmen remained unconscious through most of it, unaware that her life had become the center of an international legal battle. But as dawn broke over Mexico City, I sat in a hospital waiting room while surgeons worked to save my sister's life, and I realized that whatever happened next, I'd finally done something my grandfather never had the courage to do. I'd chosen family over secrets, truth over comfort, and love over fear. Now I just had to hope it wasn't too late. The surgical team had been working for 6 hours when Dr. Martinez, the lead surgeon, finally emerged from the operating room. His scrubs were stained with blood, and his expression was unreadable. "The surgery was successful," he said, and I felt Sophia collapse with relief beside me. "We were able to transplant a kidney from a donor who became available early this morning. Carmen is stable, but the next 48 hours will be critical." "Can we see her?" Sophia asked. "She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes, family can visit briefly." Carmen looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. But her color was better than it had been the day before, and her breathing seemed stronger. I took her hand and spoke to her quietly. "Carmen, this is Margaret. I'm here, and you're going to be okay. We're family, and we're going to take care of each other from now on." Sophia was crying quietly on the other side of the bed. "Mom, we found them. We found our American family, just like you always hoped we would." But even as we celebrated Carmen's survival, Miguel was dealing with the legal crisis that had been building around us. The immigration raid had been called off at the last minute when Mexican federal authorities intervened, claiming jurisdiction over Carmen's case as part of their investigation into cross-border fraud. The American law firm made a serious mistake, Miguel explained to me later that day. By involving immigration enforcement in what's essentially a civil inheritance dispute, they've exposed themselves to federal prosecution for conspiracy and abuse of legal process. The arrests Miguel had mentioned were happening ahead of schedule. The corrupt lawyers, including my cousin Michael, were being charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. But the most unexpected development came that afternoon when my mother arrived at the hospital with someone I'd never expected to see. "Margaret," she said, "I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez Rodriguez." I stared at the elderly woman beside my mother, trying to process what I was seeing. Elena Vasquez, Carmen's mother, had died in a car accident in 1961. I had read the lawyer's letter confirming her death. "I'm not dead," Elena said with a slight smile, speaking English with an accent that reminded me of Carmen's voice. "I'm 89 years old and I've been looking for my daughter for 60 years. The story Elena told changed everything I thought I knew about my grandfather's secret life. There had been no car accident in 1961. Elena had been forced to fake her death to escape an abusive relationship with a man who wasn't Carmen's father, a man who had been threatening to kill both Elena and Carmen. "Robert helped me disappear," Elena explained. "He arranged for new papers, a new name. I became Elena Rodriguez and moved to California, where I've lived ever since." My grandfather had been protecting Elena and Carmen, not just financially, but physically. The monthly payments hadn't just been child support. They'd been part of an elaborate witness protection arrangement that had kept Elena alive for 60 years. "But why didn't you contact Carmen after she grew up?" I asked. I tried, but by then she'd been adopted by the Morales family and had taken their name. I spent years searching for Carmen Morales, never realizing she'd kept her original first name but had no idea her mother was still alive. Elena had finally found Carmen the same way we had, through Linda's secret correspondence. But she'd been afraid to make contact directly, worried that after 60 years of believing her mother was dead, Carmen might reject her. Linda was helping me plan a reunion, Elena said. She thought Carmen's medical crisis might be the right time for the truth to come out. Sometimes people are more open to miracles when they're facing loss. I looked around the hospital room, at Carmen sleeping peacefully after her surgery, at Sophia meeting her grandmother for the first time, at my mother talking quietly with the sister she'd just discovered existed. 3 generations of women were being reunited because of secrets that had finally been revealed. But there was one more surprise waiting for us. Dr. Martinez returned that evening with news that seemed impossible. The kidney Carmen received, we've been able to identify the donor family and they've agreed to meet with you. That's unusual, isn't it? I asked. Very unusual. Donor families rarely want contact with recipients, but in this case, there's a special connection. The donor had been a young woman named Linda Chen Rodriguez, Elena's granddaughter from another relationship, a cousin Carmen had never known existed. Linda had been killed in a car accident the night before Carmen's surgery, and her family had donated her organs to help save other lives. She was named after your Aunt Linda, Elena explained tearfully. I told all my children and grandchildren about the woman in Chicago who had helped us stay connected to our family. Carmen's life had been saved by a kidney from a cousin she'd never met, donated by a family that had been part of her extended network of relatives for decades, without anyone realizing the connections. As I sat in that hospital room, surrounded by family members I'd never known, existed 48 hours earlier, I understood something about secrets and truth that Linda had spent her entire life trying to figure out. Secrets don't protect people. They isolate them. Truth might be painful in the moment, but it's the only thing that allows families to actually help each other when help is needed most. Carmen woke up the next morning to find herself surrounded by more family than she'd ever known she had. Her first words were spoken in a voice that was weak but clear. Did I miss something important? We all started laughing and crying at the same time, and I realized that sometimes the best family reunions are the ones that happen in hospital rooms when everyone finally stops keeping secrets and starts telling the truth. 6 months later, I stood in my backyard in Colorado, watching Carmen teach my grandson how to plant tomatoes in the garden she'd insisted on starting. Her recovery had been remarkable, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by family who knew her whole story and loved her completely. Abuela Carmen, my grandson said, using the Spanish word for grandmother that Carmen had taught him. Why do the seeds look so small when the tomatoes get so big? Carmen smiled, her hands gentle as she helped him dig small holes in the soil. Sometimes the most important things start very small, mijo, but with patience and love, they grow into something beautiful that feeds many people. Sophia had transferred to the University of Colorado to finish her graduate degree, and she'd moved into the apartment above my garage. She was planning to become a bilingual education teacher, following in both her mother's and great-grandfather's footsteps. Watching her with my own children, I marveled at how quickly she'd become part of our family, as if the 60-year separation had never happened. Elena had moved from California to be closer to Carmen, and she'd brought photo albums spanning decades of the life she'd built after faking her death. The two of them spent hours every day talking, filling in the gaps of their lost years. Carmen learned that she had half-siblings she'd never known about, and Elena met grandchildren and great-grandchildren she'd only dreamed of seeing. My mother had thrown herself into genealogy research with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. She discovered that the Chen family was much larger and more complicated than any of us had realized. Cousins emerged from unexpected places, family stories were corrected and expanded, and our understanding of my grandfather's life became both more complex and more forgiving. The legal battles had resolved themselves more easily than anyone expected. Carmen's inheritance had been transferred to her without further complications once the fraudulent lawyers were arrested. She'd used part of the money to pay for her medical expenses and had donated the rest to establish a scholarship fund for undocumented students pursuing education degrees. "I want other children to have the chances I never had," she'd explained. "Education changes everything, but only if people can access it." Michael, my cousin who had betrayed Linda's trust, had been sentenced to community service and probation.